Well, now let's bring in Jess Dozier. Now, Jess is about halfway through building his diorama. He's been gone the last couple of weeks, and by now he would have normally been finished with it. But because of the weather out in California and everything's sliding away or getting soaked pretty well, he hasn't been able to join us the last 2 weeks. So, Jess, welcome back. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm good to be back. I'm not getting rained down anymore, so that's not a bad thing. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we're kind of almost to the home stretch, finishing up components. So we're getting to that point where how do we take this square block, right? That's just a 12 by 12, board, basically, or, actually a board with some slats to actually, let me bring this one over. This is the actual finished diorama, right? So it looks like it all comes together, but there's a lot more to it, right? Dioramas, you want them, just like you want them to tell a story, right? So it takes some fiddling around sometimes if you got an idea of what you want to do, to end up where you want to be, right? So in this case, I wanted this thing, as a kid, I wanted it to look good from all sides. So I tried to plan it out, and I, got this little outhouse and dock, got the trestle, a couple little scenery elements, and then of course got the logboat, that really is kind of the star of the show. But and the idea of this too is when I did it, I was like, man, this is a foot long. This is perfect for a locomotive. Great, or something to display a car on, or in my case, a Shay, Climax, whatever. So what I'm going to do over the next week is, even though putting the diagram is quick, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, it sort of is a process you can do in a few hours. You can put a lot of stuff, but you've got to plan it out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, as I finish this one, I'm going to take a series of photos. And then that way, that'll be easier to share the process, and it'll be much quicker, because really, once it's planned, it really is almost like start, finish. It actually works out really well for the most part, except for the water. The water is really that last step to do this wet on wet. Okay, so a couple little things that I've got to get done before our for the next week. And I finally got, I think next 2 shows, I should be able to finish it up and get it in pretty good shape. So what I've got left, I basically have to assemble the motor. Now I know this is going to be hard to see, but this is all the basically white metal parts. This is part of what I worked with Keith to get. It's an old McKenzie Buddha motor. It's a great kit. Now it's really simple. It's just white metal. What I do, and it was an accident how I did it before, and I just like the effect of it, is that it is white metal. You put it in a blacken it and pull it out, get it immediately in water to basically get it to stop reacting. Because if you leave it in water, like I missed one of my boat cleats, I left it in overnight and it dissolved it, because the stuff is an acid, it'll just eat it. But what I do is that I drop my stuff in the blacken it. I use from Rio Grande company. So it's much more powerful than blacken it. Blacken it's fully diluted, but this stuff it's strong, and it blackens things really quickly. And then what I do is I pull it out and I immediately get it in the water, but I leave it in the water, and I leave it in the water overnight. Now, the reason I do this is I did it by accident one night. I didn't take some stuff out. And what I found the next day is that, it had stopped the reaction, but it had left some really, that's a better look at it. It left some really cool effects on it. Looking. Can you hear that? See that okay? So it almost like rusts it. It leaves stains, it leaves deposits. So then going back and just adding a little bit of paint, to highlight some stuff, it really makes, if you want something to look really old, it makes it happen really naturally. So it's really, that part's really cool. Now, so I'll get that motor assembled, poof, it'll be ready next week. Then basically it's just taking the components. We got basically the motor housing for the logboat. again, nothing, this is just a resin casting. I've added that texture, you know, kind of the wet on wet with the chalk to get some grime. I got a little fuel tank, just dabbed it with just a really light red and then hit it with some basically alcohol and then touch the top with a aged brass. But the only reason I even painted that fuel tank was just to give it some color contrast, because we don't, you know what, sometimes it's really easy to get just too many color or not enough color in something. And if you have a little bit of color in something, it'll draw your eye to it. And so if you want, you know, you want someone to draw your eye into your diorama, a little bit of color tricks your brain into looking into it pretty quickly. So again, you know, just got the components, the trussel components, the stringers, scenery block. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. My super clean workbench. Now, the next step really, and when I did the first one, it took me a while. So this one's obviously, I kind of know how I want it to be, but it took me some figuring, you know, how do I want to lay this out? I try to avoid things, if you make it too perpendicular, then they have a tendency not to look right. So the big thing here is that I made sure that when I did the scenery piece, I put a little bit of an angle in it. And then I've got these stringers and they're going to get covered by basically the deck. So they're sort of designed to fit across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these trussel pieces and I'm going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where I want everything to go. I'm just going to take it with a pencil or a little Sharpie and basically to mark where I want the land to go, because most of this thing is going to be water. I only want dirt, obviously, where there's no water. So when I apply that dirt, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to stipple on a heavy coat of yellow or white glue. And what I use for dirt, because it's a kit, I'm not actually allowed to send dirt in the mail. Go figure. For some reason that potentially can be looked at as something risky. So what I do is I just go to Home Depot and I buy a sanded tile mix. Various colors are available. I found the one that looked the most like dirt that and I mix that and I add 50% of mortar sand into it. And what's cool about it is that it's legal to ship, it's cheap, and it looks shockingly like dirt. When it's finished, it takes stain really well because, you know, it also has, when you wet it, it basically has the wet water, you know, built in. So it's almost like it's self-ballast, it's self-glues. You don't have to, even though I generally go back and I do add, you know, wet water and a diluted glue mixture, but it basically holds itself together really well and it has a really nice texture. So once I mark where the dirt's going to go, straightforward, then I'm going to go ahead and before I put that dirt down, think of when you're putting scenery together, think of it as layers, and you got to go in the right order because you don't want to put something on top of something or screw something up you've already done. So the first thing I want to do is, even though I have a base, wherever my water is going to be, I want to put down a nice base coat of what I want that water to look like. Now, this water is really thin on the diorama itself. It's just a very thin coating of Woodland Scenics acrylic, you know, they're liquid real water. And it's really like, man, it's probably a 32nd of an inch thick. It's really thin. I let that dry. That just gives a little bit of a shine. And then I go back and I add acrylic heavy gel, which is something you can get from art stores. Michael's has it. I buy it from Dick Blick Art Supply because I use a lot of it. That's what actually will give this the texture, the waves. So, but if you notice here, I think you can see the dirt. So what I want to do here, and it's hard to tell just, you know, being on video, but what I do is I go through, darker colors represent depth, lighter colors represent shallow. It's really subtle, but where I want there to be depth, even though I'm going to hide most of it, I still go through and I do the exercise. I literally use good old Woodland Scenics, super cheap. What's cool about this stuff is it's thinned already and it's very natural looking earth tones. And so you can get real subtle shades from this really easily mixing it. It's cheap. I've had this stuff forever. It goes a long ways. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark off where my scenery is going to go. Poof. I'm going to mark off where my dirt is going to be. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to paint where my water, whatever, this water's clear. I don't want to add color to my water, even though you can add acrylic colors to the woodland scenics. But then you're going to have, that's going to be the dominant color. It's not going to show any depth. It's not going to show any variation. And it just doesn't, to me, it just doesn't quite look right. I want to have some translucence. So I want to paint whatever I want to see through it. I want it on that base. All right. If I explain that well or not, but so then really, so over the next few days, what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll get the base done. And basically what happens is once that base water, the colors are there and the dirt, then the next thing we'll do is I'll put that dirt where I want it to go. Okay. Then literally it's sort of a very quick wet on wet process. I'll put that heavy gel down and literally plant everything. Okay. So I'll go through and do a little photo series. And what I'll do is we'll review that next week. And then that'll lead us into the last show, which is really about kind of the fun stuff for me. I mean, I think it's all fun, but you can tell I'm a little nuts about it. But adding a little detail, the rags, whatever it is, the barrels. There's a bird on here. He fell to his death. I got to find him. But that little stuff just finishes it. So we're getting close. To me, this is like all the components almost ready. Really, it's just putting it all together. But there's a process to that. And if you kind of follow that process, usually, your results come out really, really, like, in my brain, it doesn't take a lot of art or like, artistry. If you just follow a process, then poof, your results are going to be great. All right. I know that was brief, but I know your show is pretty tight on time, Jim, but any questions at all?
I think it's going to be a super end of the show when you put all of this together. I can't wait to see what it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it comes together shockingly fast, which is cool. I only have a couple more steps, but literally when you're like, the boat's going to be 100% done, it gets planted in the water, the logs get planted in the water, glue the deck on, drop the little dock into that wet water. The water's wet, sprinkle on some bark, place the scenery. I mean, it's sort of, what's cool about it is that it goes from a bunch of stuff to something really quick, which personally I like because, I'm impatient. So yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of pulling it all together.